Okay, we've recently discussed how to monitor auto header height. Auto header height is delivered by the symbol of the wavy line on the feeder icon and on the feeder position icon. The way auto header height works is that on the MacDon there is a range of travel between the float of the deck and the adapter. This position is monitored using a 5-volt potentiometer in the white gauge on the top of the adapter. If you take your front off or you put it back on again and it won't go into auto header height, or if you change your front from a tin front, a 41-foot vari cut from C&H, or if you go back to your MacDon, you're going to have to perform a feeder house cal. If you're resuming into crop and the deck is going into the dirt, perform the feeder house cal. If the feeder is slow to respond or it responds inappropriately, perform the feeder house cal. It's a very simple one to do because it's automated by the combine. A couple of key things: leave the gauge wheels down in the working position. Make sure the hydraulic top link on the feeder is fully retracted. Put the reel in a reasonable working position, not too far forwards, not too far down. When the feeder house cal is occurring, multiple processes occur, but one of them is the feeder house is going to supply voltage to the hydraulics and it's going to weigh the deck. The combine needs to understand the weight of the draper, and the better it does this, the better it will manage the draper in crop and whilst returning to cut. On your Pro 700, from the home screen there's a Calibrations tab. In the Calibrations tab, the first tab gives you Calibrations. Drop the box down. The top left one is the header cal. So I select it. Park the combine with the engine running and header level, so you don't need to have any separator running or the feeder running. Check your hydraulics are at decent temperatures and the feeder's going to move. Okay, so my reel is in a reasonable work position. I tend to set it on roughly about 6, halfway out the extension. I then tend to lift it up so that it's going to be at the point of the head on the crop. I retract my top link. I make sure my float locks are released on my adapter, and my MacDon is fully connected. So, okay, pulse the header down button. Simply on the handpiece, press and hold for a couple of seconds. Now, watching the MacDon, the feeder house now is taking the MacDon all the way down to the ground. It's dropped the feeder to the ground, the adapter to the ground, and it's left the deck firmly ensconced on the ground. You can see from the numerical scale that it says 4. That means that the deck is as far up in its range of travel relative to the adapter as it's possible to be. Your gauge wheels are still on the ground on both sides of the MacDon. Pulse header up switch means nothing more than go to the up position on the multifunction handle, press and hold for a few seconds. The feeder house is now going to go all the way to the top. You can tell that the deck is now at its lowest position relative to the adapter by the fact that it's sitting at 0 on the numerical scale. On the right hand side, on the back of the feeder house, there's a 5-volt potentiometer. It is now worked out where the ground is and where the top of the feeder house is. Okay, it now says pulse header down switch again, so we go to the multifunction handle and we press and hold. Determining header weight and threshold currents for feeder lift and lower. To me, it's all about watching what the words on the screen are saying and what the white gauge is doing. The white gauge gives you a lot of feedback about the relationship between the feeder, the adapter that is on the feeder, and the draper, which is part of the main frame that the gauge wheels are connected to. If you monitor what the deck is doing and what the feeder is doing during the cals, you'll get a better understanding of what's going on. Watch the gauge, see how the relationship between the adapter and the deck is changing. If you watch the hydraulic top link that marries the two, you can see the relationship changing for it between horizontal and angular. The deck is now going to the ground. The feeder is weighing it by looking at the threshold voltages necessary to lift and lower the draper. If you put a different front on, you're going to have to weigh it again, and those figures will be different. So give it a chance to do its thing. It is a slow cal, but it's well worth it. Again, pulse header up switch. During this next section, it's going to look at the relationships of the auto header height potentiometer. It's going to look at the top 10% of the relationship and the bottom 10%. That will be signified between 0.5 and 3.5 and 4. It's good to understand what the words on the screen are doing and how the Draper and the MacDon auto header height sensors are teeing in with the combine. Pulse header up switch on our multifunction handle, press and hold. Down goes the Draper. It goes down, it sees 4. That's the end of the volt range. It's going to put the Draper down, but then it realizes there's no more volts to be found. It lifts it up, the gauge moves, 3.5 it stops. That's the top 10%. And then it goes all the way up. It lifts the Draper off the ground, so the feeder keeps going. It reaches 0. It looks for any more. There it is, there's the last bit. So it now knows where the bottom end of the 5-volt pot sits. It's tested the tilt sensor. It gives the feeder house a little tilt for your hydraulic rams, for your tilt. All it does is reverse the polarity and check that it can remove them. There's a lot going on at there, but watching the gauge teaches you the most about what's going on in the screen. The combine learns a lot about how the MacDon is set up, how the spring tensions work, how heavy it is, and it needs to know this to manage all fronts, both C&H fronts, MacDons, or any other manufacturer that you'd like to put onto your C&H combine. Axle flow auto header height is a must for me. It's easy to set up, it's easy to calibrate, but there's a few key components to the feeder house cal which will help you to get the auto header height running. As it finishes the process, it will tell you it's done. Once it's done it, go back and reset all of those auto header height settings. Reset your reel positions, re-engage your number 1 and number 2 height. Okay? If you don't engage the header sensors, both the reel height, calibration completed. I come back to my run screen. Toolbox, in my toolbox, so I've got my 45-foot maximum work height. My header type is a Draper Vari-Feed. My header subtype is a 2000. You do have a shift function, that's the button on the front. It's not a 3000 series, that's a C&H front. It's not a 41-foot Vari cut, it's not a tin front. You are a 2000 with a MacDon. It's a rigid frame. This is a 40-foot, so I'm cutting it around 12.8 for my header width. Auto cut width is on. Remember, auto cut width will default to off when you close the big top and you lose DGPS. Auto cut width is good. Every time you finish a paddock and you're not cutting a full 45 foot, say you're cutting just 2 foot of crop on one end, if you've got auto cut width running, it will amend the yield map so that it doesn't think that that was the yield from a 45 foot front. It will think that was 2 foot of crop. Auto cut width must always be turned on. In head 2, at the top option we have header sensors enabled. If that is disabled, the feeder house cal will not measure the top and bottom 10% of the range of the potentiometer. Scroll down, we have got a real horizontal position sensor, a real vertical position sensor, a header lateral tilt, no vertical knives, and auto level in the headland. We don't have a real horizontal position in a MacDon, but we do have a vertical position. That's what controls the height of the reel. So, real vertical position sensor, yes, and header sensors enabled. That is auto header height and reel height. I'm now going to go back in, engage the separator. I'm going to engage my feeder. I'm going to reset all of those heights. So, I now put my front down to my normal crop cutting height. I've got a nice 2 and 3 on the MacDon gauge. I've got my reel at a reasonable working height, and that is my number 2 height. Select. I'm now going to set my rock height. It's gone straight into auto header height with a wavy symbol. I lift it up a little bit from my rock height, and I reset that as my number 1. Into wavy line, auto header height 6. So, now I've reset both those positions. I shift and resume on the handpiece Draper comes out of crop, reel goes down to clear the knife, H in my window. One touch puts it back to my rock height, lifts the reel back up, go back down to my normal cutting height. Okay, all of these are well explained in the operator's manual, both the feeder house calibration and the setup of the armrest controls and what you should expect to see on the auto height icons in your Pro 700.